across to Brussels. Speak to our correspondent Dave Keating, who joins us from there. Dave, I mean, this feels like a bit of a watershed moment, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, this was a very difficult decision for the Commission. I'm told this was actually internally subject to a lot of back and forth. Because while we can see that most countries in Europe, all countries in Europe really have ended most COVID restrictions, COVID-19 is not over. And the World Health Organization hasn't declared an end to the pandemic, and only the WHO can do that. However, we were getting into an awkward situation here where on the books, the COVID policy at EU level remained the same as during the height of the pandemic, while we can see that national governments in the EU have mostly gotten rid of their restrictions and changed their policy. And when restrictions were ramping up, there was a lot of emphasis that this had to be coordinated at EU level. You couldn't have every country acting on its own. And yet, when it came to the ending of the pandemic restrictions, we didn't see that change in policy at EU level. So this is really recognizing what's been happening at national level already. We are expecting this document, which should be adopted early this afternoon, to recommend a change in testing strategies so that the testing will be more targeted and more based on samples, something more similar to how they test for seasonal flu every year. Also, this new strategy will say that the emphasis that the vigilance should still be high and that sequencing of new strains should increase, because of course the big concern is that there will be another more virulent strain coming around, and of course these restrictions will have to be adjusted. Now, so in the medium term, this shouldn't change so much for people because the national governments have mostly already adopted these policies, but this will coordinate the policies and get ready for that next strain if it comes. The thinking here is that changing the readiness of the EU to adjust to this new phase is going to make dealing with any possible future variant a lot easier, because everyone will be starting from the same page. And it is possible that national governments will cite this EU decision to end whatever remaining restrictions they might have.
Dave, as you mentioned there, of course, other European countries, individual countries already making their own adjustments. What kind of picture are you getting from that?
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, the restriction situation in Europe is pretty uniform now. Almost all countries have really ended almost all restrictions. The one exception is mask mandates. So those are a bit of a patchwork still. You have some countries which have no mask mandates. Here in Belgium, the only restriction left really is that we have to wear masks on public transport. But you can see when you're on the metro here, about 40% of people, I would say, are not wearing masks. And so you're getting into this difficult situation where you have a law on the books that observably isn't being followed. Also for planes now, I mean, people can see that the US just ended its mask mandate for public transport, including planes. And so I think people's attention is turning to that here. Should the mask mandates remain on planes? Of course, just like in the US, the awkward thing about planes is they travel between states that could have very different COVID policies regarding face masks. So here in Belgium, of course, it might seem normal to be on a plane and wearing a mask because we have that public transport face mask requirement. But if you were traveling to another country in the EU, say Poland, where face mask requirements are less stringent, then it might seem weird coming from that country to here. So I think this EU decision may be used to lessen those face mask requirements and also lessen those testing requirements. That's another thing that varies between countries. We still have these passenger locator forms that are kind of left over from the pandemic, which aren't really being looked at anymore, but still a lot of countries are still requiring passengers to do them. The tourism industry is asking countries to get rid of these because they can be an inhibitor to international travel within the EU. And certainly testing requirements, having to prove vaccination status, they're saying that's really not necessary now that most people in Europe are vaccinated. So again, this change in the EU policy may be cited by individual countries as reasons for getting rid of those PLFs, getting rid of proof of vaccination requirements for travel.
Dave, thanks very much. Dave Keating, our correspondent, talking to us there live from Brussels.